I've made one too many mistakes in quilting not to set myself up for success. Enough talking already. We have some new habits to start. When piecing long strips together, there is a habit that I've acquired, and you should too. When you sew long strips together, things can get a little skewed. They can bow over time. What I mean by over time, by the time you've sewn 10 strips together, you've established a really nice bow in your strip piecing. That is no good. Feed your strips in your sewing machine when you start. Then you are going to flip that strip and turn it around and then start sewing at the other end and feed it in your sewing machine. You can see here in this video where I have sewed the strips properly, one end and then alternating to the other end. In the other example, I just kept sewing on that same end. And you can see here, there is a slight 1/8 of an inch off from where I started to sew. Imagine that on 10 strips. It adds up and you are going to end up with a wonky block. Most quilters have gotten in the habit of setting their seam. Now they typically do it by laying down the seam and then just kind of heating it up while it's folded. I do that sometimes, but I've acquired another habit when it comes to setting that seam. On this example, I am pressing the seams to the dark side. So in that case, I do place my seams face up first, and then I give them a little tiny nudge with the hot iron to get them going in the direction that I want them to go. Then I flip them over to the right side and then continue to press out my seams. I tend to do that more in strip piecing than just regular everyday piecing, but I just find that that's a good habit to get into. When I do it the other way, it ultimately never fails. I get a flip seam somehow on those long strips, and I don't know why. While we're on the subject of pressing, I have another habit that I have. When I'm at the sewing machine and I'm piecing any blocks together or strips, it doesn't matter what it is, I tend to only sew a few and then take it to the ironing station and give it a good hot press before I continue adding on my next pieces. I find that when I press in between a couple strips or a couple blocks at a time, when I add that next piece on, everything's laying nice and flat on the sewing machine bed. I've made one too many mistakes in quilting not to set myself up for success. There's nothing more frustrating in quilting than when your seams pull apart. So maybe you did backstitch and then you've trimmed your block and now you've cut that backstitch right out. When I see that, I get so frustrated. Some quilters will tell you not to handle your quilt top too much, or that will happen. Can I tell you that it's bound to happen unless you get this habit in your life right now. Pretend like this is your quilt top right here. You are going to stay stitch all along the edge, locking in all of those seams on and around the entire edge. I typically only lock in about 1/8 of an inch because I don't want anything showing through in the end when I'm all done with my quilt. And sometimes that can happen. I can get too wide and not realize it. If I tug and pull, those seams are not going to come apart. Have you ever found yourself in that sewing and quilting, even free motion quilting zone, and you're so into it that you're just moving right along, not thinking about anything but what you're doing? And then all of a sudden, your bobbin runs out. Not only does your bobbin thread run out, but you have no more left. That's a tough spot to be in because you have to stop what you're doing, get out of that zone, and wind some bobbins. The habit that I've gotten into, when I find myself in downtime, I just grab a bunch of empty bobbins and just start winding and winding and winding. That way, I don't have to stop what I'm doing, get out of that zone to wind a bobbin and try to get back into the zone. A side tip concerning bobbin tail threads: take the tail of the bobbin thread and give it a tiny pull and wedge it right between the bulk of the thread and the side of the bobbin. When making your quilts, do you put labels on them? Putting labels on a quilt is something that you really have to work hard at implementing as a habit in your sewing room. An easy way that I found to put labels on my quilts is to simply just free motion quilt something on them. It could be a name, and definitely put a year, because everyone wants to know, when was that quilt made? It's so easy to forget. You just kind of want to be done with that quilt, right? I urge you, just simply free motion quilt something really quick on it, and it won't disappoint later on. This next habit I didn't always do. It didn't come natural at all. And that is cleaning up all of those stray threads on the back of your quilt. For me, it's typically from free motion quilting, where I stop and start and where it's tied off at. So yeah, get in the habit of snipping those right away when you're done. Sometimes I'll work on one part of the quilt and then I'll go in and snip, 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 and then I'll continue on free motion quilting. So that way I know that I've done that already and taken care of those tiny stray threads. This next habit will save you some heartache. Whenever you trim those stray threads, never use a straight pair of scissors. You always want to use the curved pair of little scissors. How do I know that? Because I have snipped through the back of my quilts before. Yep. If you have too, let me know in the comments. It's a heartache. You don't even know you did it until you did it and you made a hole. Whenever you feel the need to do some snipping off of those stray threads, only grab the curved pair of scissors. That is a great habit to get into. If you're like me, you go through a ton of rotary blades. For a long time, I would just stack them up and keep them somewhere in my sewing room. It's not good if you have grandkids running around and you have stashed somewhere some old rotary blades. If you're not going to use them for paper rotary cutting or anything like that, I would urge you to get rid of them and dispose of them. You need to wrap them up in some sort of tape. Now here I'm showing you how I wrapped it up in some blue tape. Typically I have duct tape, so I would use the strongest tape that you have. Wrap it up a few times. You can even add some cardboard in there just to make sure that it's puncture proof. The habit here is to get rid of them so that you don't have them in your sewing room anymore. It's not really good to hold on to blades that are dull. You're not going to use them. And plus, how many blades can we put in our blade saver cutter? I mean, that right there, one will last us a long time. Now that I've got you on the topic of rotary cutters, if you have little ones, dogs or cats even, any kind of animal running around your house, nowadays it could be almost anything. It could be a ferret. I know some of you have iguanas and different things like that. You want to make sure that you put your rotary cutter not only in lock position so that it's harder for them to open it because they just don't know how. It's a really good habit to get into. When you are done in your sewing room and you are leaving it, to put your rotary cutter up high. Now, you can put it up high on a shelf like I do here. Some of you may have a locked cabinet within your sewing room that you can utilize to put your blades and all of your sharps in, and I totally recommend that. It would be sad if one of our children, grandchildren, or our pets got a hold of that. That is a great habit. If you take any habit away from today, that is a good one. Take a look at your screen right now. I've handpicked some special videos that I think that you'll enjoy. Go ahead and click on one of them, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Until next time on the Sewing Channel, take care.